Hello, and thanks for tuning in tonight to Answers for the Paranormal for Sunday, July the 30th, 2017. My name's Bill Posey, and I'm your host tonight. On the line with me over in his office in Horsham, Pennsylvania, is my co-host, Joe Marodi. How you making out over there tonight, Joe?
Doing very well, Bill. Good evening to you and to our guests and to all of our listeners tonight. And it's going to be a third show of some vital information, some stuff that needs to really be heard, and hopefully we can get through tonight. I feel good. My mind is relatively clear tonight, so hopefully we can really open some eyes and ears tonight.
Yeah, for sure. Again, we are Answers for the Paranormal. You can check us out on the web, www.answersfortheparanormal.org. Right there on our website, on our contact page, our email addresses, joe@answersfortheparanormal.org and william@answersfortheparanormal.org. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can do so at either one of those addresses, and we'll open up communication with you, and hopefully you'll do that. Well, tonight is part 3 of our series that we've titled Counterfeiters in High Places, and we've been addressing the Federal Reserve, the central banking system, and tonight we're going to zero in on the progressive income tax with our guest. And Joe, at this time, why don't you introduce her?
Yes, everyone should know who our guest is tonight if they've been listening recently to Answers for the Paranormal. Her name is Tina Foster. She's an attorney. She's a researcher. She's an author. She's been interviewed many times over the internet, and I don't know whether she's actually been interviewed on FM or AM radio or television. We'll ask her that. She's authored the book entitled The Splitting Image, Exposing the Secret World of Doubles, Decoys, and Imposter Replacements. Dean is especially astute in the area of the Paul is Dead genre of conversation. So again, she's our partner in crime. She's been on with us many, many times before. And I suspect, Bill, in the future, Tina's going to be a part of this program. So she's demonstrated the fact that she's diligent in her research. That's clear for anyone to see. So with that being said, Tina, welcome back.
Hi, thanks. It's great to be here. I just wanted to say that I was on the radio in Australia, in Brisbane, 4KQ 693 in Brisbane. And they were doing a conspiracy theory show, and mine, of course, was Paul McCartney is Dead. So it's on my blog if anybody wants to look at it. It's from September 2016. And I think I've been on other radio shows. Most of them are like web radio or podcasts, though. But yeah, anyway, to answer your question.
No TV?
No. Well, see, I have a great face for radio. I'm just kidding. I like to, I'm a private person. I don't like to. I'm actually not a good public speaker, but for some reason being on the radio is fine because nobody can see me.
Well, hey, you know what?
I get nervous.
Look, when did you start? When was your first interview?
2009. It was Ghostly Talk Radio, and unfortunately that's not available anymore because I didn't save it. Now it's gone. And now Axiom Rule of Law Radio is gone too, my interview with them. Most of them are available, though.
Well, you've been doing this longer than we have. We started in 2010.
Yeah, I beat you.
Well, you did beat us, and Bill, I was not aware that Tina is well known now in Australia.
Yeah. Yeah, she's big down under, Joe. You know.
She is. That's right. Well, I mean, I don't know what off the top of my head the monetary system of Australia is. I don't know if they have a central bank. My suspicion is that they do.
Yes.
But tonight, we're going to get right back into that. And for our listeners and for Tina's listeners too as well, and I was sharing this with Bill and Tina before we went live, was this is really not me and Bill's wheelhouse as far as content. It's and this is why we appreciate Tina's research so much. It's some of the things that we programs that we produce. It really requires a lot of concentration on my part, which is not really a strong suit, if you know me. Okay? 'Cause I really got to focus. So preparing, looking over my notes as far as the Federal Reserve, anything out there on the Federal Reserve System and the income tax, it's very time-consuming, and it can be very confusing. You can go down some rabbit holes and you can be distracted very easily. You know, me and Bill's wheelhouse is the paranormal. So with that being said, tonight I've done my best. I'm sure that Bill's done his best. And Tina's done a lot of preparation for tonight's show. So we're going to get right back into it. So pick up right where you left off last time, Tina. Get right back into it.
Okay, sure. So we were talking about how the Federal Reserve wields economic power and how they can create a boom-bust cycle. So they'll create easy money, and then they can cause depression. So the easy money is by inflating the money supply. Then they can cause depression by contracting the money supply again. So I wanted to start with a quote by Alfred Crozier, who was an Ohio attorney that testified before Congress in 1913, so whenever the Federal Reserve was being debated. He said the Glass-Owens bill, which created the Federal Reserve, it grants just what Wall Street and the big banks for 25 years have been striving for, private instead of public control of currency. It robs the government and the people of all effective control over the public's money, and invests in the banks exclusively the dangerous power to make money among the people scarce or plenty. Robert H. Hemphill was a credit manager for the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank, and he said, "We are completely dependent on the commercial banks. Someone has to borrow every dollar we have in circulation, cash or credit. If the banks create ample synthetic money, we are prosperous. If not, we starve. We are absolutely without a permanent money system." When one gets a complete grasp of the picture, the tragic absurdity of our hopeless position is almost incredible, but there it is. So one of the examples that I have of how a bank can tighten credit in 1891, the American Bankers Association, there was a memo on how they could tighten credit to take farms. So this memo said, on September 1st, 1894, now this was before the Federal Reserve, but it's just an example of how banks work, okay? Mm-hmm. "We will not renew our loans under any consideration. On September 1st, we will demand our money. We will foreclose and become mortgagees in possession. We can take 2/3 of the farms west of the Mississippi as well, at our own price. Then the farmers will become tenants, as in England." So in 2007 to 2008, there was the big financial crisis, right? The Great Recession. So the Fed's policy of maintaining low interest rates throughout the early 2000s, which resulted in cheaper mortgages, was seen as a major factor in the housing bubble. There was a Stanford economist named John Taylor who has argued that the Fed's loose monetary policy in the early 2000s likely exacerbated housing price inflation, thus spurring the subsequent collapse of the subprime mortgage market.
Tina, I have a quick question for you. You know, with the way that, let me preface it this way. You said on our last couple of broadcasts that you do a lot of trading, right? Mm-hmm. So you're like what's known as a day trader? Is that correct?
Technically a swing trader, but yeah.
Okay. So when you look at what's going on now, do you see a cycle that's starting to set up as a boom bust that's on the horizon?
Well, the market has been run up really high, so a lot of people do think it's a bubble.
Yeah.
And it it could pop. And also there could be a housing market bubble again, you know, and well, because the interest rates have been so low for so long. I mean, really, it would be dumb not to borrow money at such low interest rates, right?
Yeah. Like I watch, Kramer and a few of those other crazy guys over on Fox Business, and I just heard the other day, I forget the guy's name now, but anyway, he was saying that he sees the Dow hitting 31,000 by the beginning of next year, and I keep saying that's the overvaluation of that is just mind-boggling to me, because I don't see in our economy where they can sustain that. Do you?
Well, not without the dollar becoming hyperinflated. See, the extra dollars, they're probably running at the market. Because people you can't save anymore, because there's no gold or silver, really. Like, you don't have monetary gold or silver, so you can't really save like people did in the past, where you can just tuck it away for the future, because every year it's losing 2% value.
Yeah.
If the Fed wants 2% inflation every year, then you're devaluing your currency by 2%. So, you know, Robert Kiyosaki says savers are losers. So, you know, you got to invest the money. I mean, you can put it in gold or silver. That, you know, we've talked about that, but gold and silver are the enemy of the state, so they're purposely trying to take the price down. With, you know, I think we talked about silver being short sold,
right? And
they try to take the, hammer the price down. So, you know, you've got to find investment. So, you know, do stock market or real estate really are the two big ones. So, kind of runs the price up. But like we saw with 2007, 2008 mortgage, the bubble burst. And of course, you know, the stock market, they had the technology in 2000, you know, the stock market, that bubble burst. And then again, in 2007, 2008, the stock market went down a lot. Mm-hmm. So they run it up, and then the bubble pops, and then it goes back down. And that's when you should be buying, by the way.
Yeah, right.
But I'm not giving investment advice. I'm just kidding. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how high it'll run at.
Yeah, but
it's had some small pullbacks.
Mm-hmm.
That really nothing big for a year and a half. Like, not even with Brexit. Like, it went down for a few days.
Yeah, just
and then it was right back up.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So I guess the whole point is that, you know, this isn't real economic indicators. You know what I'm trying to say? They can almost manipulate whatever they want to accomplish with the economy.
Yes.
To where in the past, like we were talking about before, when it was driven by corporation profits and reinvesting and spurring the economy, now they almost have to, all right, let's raise interest rates here, let's make them zero here so that we can... It's not real.
Right. So when they had really low interest rates, when everything collapsed in the financial crisis, they were trying to spur the economy, get people to borrow, get, stuff going again. But we've had so many years of super low interest now. It's like... And if they try to raise it, then they're afraid it's going to cause a depression, so they're doing it very slowly.
Yeah.
And, like we said, that's inflating the dollar, and it's devaluing the dollar, and so a lot of people think it could lead to a hyperinflationary situation, but, we'll see. I mean, as long as there's the petrodollar, then maybe that won't happen.
All right, sorry to get off.
Well, talking about unless you have anything further on the boom-bust cycle,
No.
Tina, speaking about manipulating the economy, let's talk a little bit about the Great Depression, which lasted from around October of 1929 to 1939. And in the context of the Federal Reserve, Tina, do you believe that the Federal Reserve System caused the Great Depression, or were there other factors involved?
Well, my information is that the bankers wanted to crash the economy of the Roaring Twenties because Harding and Coolidge presidents were against the League of Nations. They cut the income tax, they increased tariffs on imports, and they reduced the national debt. So the Federal Reserve flooded the country with money. The volume of money was actually up 62%. So businesses were borrowing a lot of money and were heavily indebted, and the stock market was run up. So it wasn't a coincidence that Rockefeller, JP Morgan, and people like that got out of the stock market just in time, and they bought gold, by the way. So Paul Warburg, who was one of the big financiers, Illuminati guys back then, April of 1929, he sent a secret memo that advised his friends of a collapse and depression. Joseph P. Kennedy wrote a letter to one of his friends that said, "Sell all your stock now. Don't ask any questions." Oh, sorry, I lost my little earbud. So then, in August 1929, the Fed started tightening the money. And on October 24th, 1929, Black Thursday, the big New York bankers called in their 24-hour broker margin call loans. And so the brokers and the stockholders, if they had stock on margin, they had to sell at any price. And that caused the crash. And all the bankers, they did that at the same time on purpose. So Curtis Dahl, who was the son-in-law of FDR, he wrote a book called My Exploited Father-in-Law. He wrote, "The Depression was the calculated shearing of the public by the world money powers, triggered by the planned sudden shortage of supply of call money in the New York money market." So as a result, about $40 billion was consolidated into fewer hands. So you can guess who they were.
Mm-hmm.
So the Fed continued to contract the money supply to worsen the Depression. Representative McFadden, the one that was poisoned at the banquet, he blamed the bankers for the crash. He said it was not accidental. It was a carefully contrived occurrence. The international bankers sought to bring about a condition of despair here so that they might emerge as rulers of us all. So he accused the international bankers of causing the crash to reacquire the gold stock which Europe had lost to America as a result of World War I. And Milton Friedman, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, said the Federal Reserve definitely caused the Great Depression by contracting the amount of currency in circulation by 1/3 from 1929 to 1933. And the former Fed chairman, Ben Bernanke, he admitted the Fed was responsible. He said, "I would like to say to Milton and Anna, regarding the Great Depression, you're right, we did it." So then FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, when he was president, he enacted bank reform laws that gave the Federal Reserve even more control. And he was rewarded by the Fed putting more money into circulation, which helped end the Depression.
Well, and the Great Depression is a show that it in and of itself, it could take one or two shows by itself, but in the interest of time, trying to move right along, I just have a couple questions, Tina, as far as the Federal Reserve within the Great Depression here. You had said that Federal Reserve flooded the country with money and that the volume was up 62%. Is that what you said?
Yes.
And what do you mean by that? What is the volume up 62%?
So
62% of what?
The money supply. So there's if you consider how many dollars there are, they actually increased that. like I guess they made credit just much easier to attain. So each time you take out credit, you're inflating the money supply, right? So if you use, well, I don't know if they had credit cards back then, but if you take a loan, remember, because of fractional reserve lending, like they only have to have 10% and they can loan out. Like for every dollar, they can actually loan out 10, so that inflates by 9, right? So they were, people were borrowing a lot and they were running at the stock market. And so when they contracted it again, then it was harder to get credit. They can actually refuse to extend your credit, like with that bank memo to take people's farms. They could call it in, which they did with the margin loans, right? They called it in all at the same time, so everybody had to sell at the same time, which of course caused it to crash. Because when there's a margin call, you've got to sell within 24 hours. Right. And then, so everybody's selling at once, everybody's dumping their stocks, and it's like, yeah, of course it's a crash. But they orchestrated that.
Okay, so you were just explaining how they print more, so they would print more money.
Well, they don't necessarily need to print more, because if you take out a loan, that's inflating the money supply too. And even though it's just digits, it's still considered part of the money volume.
So then how do they contract the amount of currency in circulation?
Then they would raise the interest rates. So you lower interest rates and you make it easier to get credit, inflate, raise interest rates, make it harder to get credit, that would tend to deflate.
Okay, gotcha. Now, do the prices of goods and services go up and down, Tina, according to how much currency is actually in circulation?
Yes, so inflation, when the prices go up, that's because there's more money in the system. So then if you have deflation with less money in the system, prices would tend to go down. And they definitely don't want that now. But yeah, that's kind of basically how it works.
Last question from me about the Great Depression. Why do you think it went on for 10 years? Certainly much longer than any other depression or recession that we've ever experienced. Why did it go on for 10 years?
Well, I mean, I guess because the Fed wanted to get more power, more control. They were forcing it to make the people miserable, so that they would then clamor for bank reform laws. But then it would be like they're being tricked into giving the Fed more power, which FDR did.
Yeah,
so it's like a psyop in a way.
It's just odd that that it would have taken so long for them to garner more power. When you think about the fact that not even the inception and the actual signing of the Glass-Owens Act, which established the Federal Reserve System, didn't even take 10 years. It's just strange to me that if the goal of the Great Depression was to just give them more power, that it took 10 years to do that. It's just, one of those thoughts that go on in my head.
Sure.
Anything?
No, that's all I have on that one.
Okay. Bill, anything?
Yeah, I want to add something in. Tina, you were saying that the Fed flooded the country with money prior to the Depression, and businesses began to borrow a lot of money, so they were up to their eyeballs in debt. The stock market went up. Then you had guys like Rockefeller, Morgan. They were getting out of the stock market when it was at this height, and they were buying gold. Kennedy told his friend, buy gold. So they were getting into safe areas where their money couldn't be manipulated and taken from them. They couldn't lose money because they were hedging with gold. So the reason I want to go over all that again is because recently there have been reports that we've seen a stock market run up in the past. Well, since Trump got in office, I know that the market went from, I think, 17,000 up to where we're at now.
Are you talking about the S&P?
Well, the Dow Jones and the S&P both hit all-time highs, as did the Nasdaq. So the stock market is on a run. Now, recently there's been reports that China has been buying massive amounts of gold. Have you heard anything about that?
Yes, because there was speculation that they wanted to have the global reserve currency and have it backed by gold.
Mm. So they're looking for a way to be able to get away from the dollar as the economic indicator of the world,
right?
And get into something where they could possibly call that in, could they? I mean,
right.
We're indebted to China for massive amounts. I don't know the exact number, but I know it's up there.
Right.
So I'm just wondering, is something being set up similar to the Depression of the late 20s, early 30s?
Oh, well, potentially.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if we just go back to the fundamental argument here that the New World Order is the ultimate goal,
mm-hmm.
and we're talking about the financial mechanism to implement that in these three interviews, then you've got the demoralization, the destabilization, the crisis, and then the normalization phases, right, to implement
mm-hmm.
the strategy. So, you could be doing the destabilization going towards the crisis so that you could then have your New World Order after that. So if you crash the economy, then the people will argue or clamor for these reforms that would be New World Order-ly,
yeah.
right?
Right.
They'll kind of be tricked into getting more centralized control of the economy. So, we can't have these big bank failures and bank runs, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's what they're trying to do. So right now everything is being run up,
mm-hmm.
and we'll see how big of a pullback there is.
Yeah.
If there's another financial crisis like 2007, 2008, they might try to get in some legislation that would even make the Fed more powerful.
Mm.
So we just have to watch out for that.
Yeah, for sure. And I might add
Bill?
that the landscape of you have the whole North Korea setting off ICBMs. You have the United States response to that being flyovers with the Air Force. You have Russia kicking out our diplomats. So it'd be interesting to see the stock market's reaction to all this stuff going on over the weekend.
Yeah. True.
Hey, Bill, I don't know how we're going to get through the whole thing tonight. I mean, there's the things that I have to ask. I just can't rein myself in. I just had a pop-up question as a result of the question that you just asked Tina. Do you, Bill, and you, Tina, do you know who you owe money to? Are you indebted to anybody financially?
Yes.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I am. Nation Star Mortgage, a couple other banks, a couple other utilities. Yeah. Do you know how much you owe and who you owe money to?
Uh-huh.
You do.
Yep.
Right. I think everybody would say, unless they're completely irresponsible, they know what their debt service is and who they owe that money to. What is the current national debt? And I remember this is one of the reasons. I mean, call me silly for voting for silly reasons. When I was watching the debates last year, Donald Trump was the only guy who brought up the national debt.
Yeah.
At that time was what, $20 trillion?
21 trillion.
Yeah, it's at least 16. I think it's 20. I think you're right. Yeah.
$20 trillion. Okay. Do we know who that money is owed to?
Well, a lot is to the Federal Reserve.
A lot. Okay, that's
I don't
general,
know exactly, but yeah, I know.
Define a lot. Here's my point. Here's my point. I should be able to, because it's part of our money, our tax money. It's part of the system that we have of government, a representative republic government, a representative republic government, that I should be able to go somewhere on some website and see what the national debt is and see exactly who it's owed to. But I can't do that.
No.
I think this, and my point for even bringing this up is that this goes to the utter secrecy and the shadowy nature of the Federal Reserve System that, as we've said, has been in place since the early 20th century.
Yep.
And if that doesn't bother people, that, you know, they're expected to live on, everyone is expected to live on a budget. Everybody's got a budget. But our government doesn't have to live on a budget, because they can keep borrowing from the Federal Reserve.
Yeah. Well, Joe,
just a little aside.
Yeah.
Which is going to lead into our next area, which is going to piss me off even more.
I know. I was hoping we would never get to this part of the show. because this is the
can we just get past this?
This is the one where I tend to go ballistic on. But, you know, I mean, your point's a good one, Joe, because, you know, as being a representative republic, you would think that people would actually want to have a say in what goes on and are interested in a say about what goes on. But, you know, people have their 2.1 kids. They have 2 vehicles, maybe 3. You know, one of those 2.1's in college. The other one is, you know, making their way through. They have a job that pays okay. You know, I mean, they live week to week, but, hey, they can go out on Friday and Saturday night and have a good time. This is the culture that we live in. You know what I mean? People aren't, they're not in a place where they're going to say, hey, how come we have $21 trillion in debt?
Right. How come our federal government doesn't balance their books?
Well, because, you know, I'm talking about this a little bit later with the gold standard, but the deficit spending, it's way easier for the government to confiscate people's money through inflation than through taxes. So if they actually wanted to give people a bill for, like, you know, the war in Iraq, you know, here's your $20,000 bill for funding this war, people be like, no, we are not going to war. But if they can do it through inflation, then, you know, you don't really feel the effects right when it happens.
That's
It's
right.
like
It's
later down the road, it's like, oh, prices are up. Like,
Yeah,
wow,
hey,
milk
how'd
is
that
way more
happen?
expensive than it used to be. But you're like, oh, maybe
Right.
there was a dairy shortage or something. You don't really put it together. So it's kind of a trick.
Yeah.
In the simplest terms, Bill and Tina, isn't it part of the brainwashing where you buy now, and you pay later? Is it that simple?
It is. Yep,
Tina?
and it goes back
I'm
to
not sure I'm thinking about that.
and it goes
I mean,
back
if
to,
you buy now on credit, you're going to have to pay more later, I guess, if that's what you mean.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's buying now with what you really can't afford to buy. Basically, is what my point is.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I think I like to really think. I like to think simplistically. I know that it's really not. It's probably not a good idea for this program, but I think when it boils down to is that people really don't understand how money works, and I think that that's part of the brainwashing system,
Yep.
and it's part of the credit system, and it's part of the credit system is inextricably linked with the fiat money system. Is that correct, Tina?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say with the deficit spending with gold, see, one reason why the governments don't like a gold standard is because they're spending, like the amount of money is limited to how much gold they have.
Right.
Right.
So if you like Bretton Woods, $35 an ounce of gold, then that's what you have. You have however many dollars are, equal that amount of gold. So then when you go off of gold, well, then you can have however many dollars you want.
Exactly.
It's like not limited.
Right.
Exactly.
And then it causes the inflation because, well, the more dollars are, the less value each one has.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what governments prefer.
Yes, they do.
They don't want to be, like, limited to the amount of gold they have.
Hey, they didn't call him Tricky Dick for nothing.
Tricky Dick Nixon?
Right, so he took us off the gold standard. Exactly, because France had the audacity of wanting to get its gold for the dollars that it had. He's like, yeah, I don't think so, not so much. So Bretton Woods was over with that. But anyway.
All right, let's move into. I'm certainly my favorite portion of all of this. It's the federal income tax, and I guess we may or may not get into the state income tax and then the local income tax. The local income tax being a relatively recent creature, but the federal income tax obviously has been around since 1913. And just before you even get into this goes to the whole thing of people just not being interested in these sorts of things that really affect our lives as much or more than anything. Back in the 1980s, I had mentioned that I was an avid listener of talk radio, WWDB here in Philadelphia, and talk radio was really talk radio. And one of the hosts there, Irv Homer, had begun a movement to repeal the 16th Amendment. And I remember the morning that he announced that, the woman who followed him came on and said, "You'll never do it, Irv. You'll never do it. You'll never get interest in it." And, she was right, but it was something that was a picture to me of how lazy people are in their thinking when it comes to the things that really, how they can really change their lives for the good. So that was a movement that died before it even got started. We did the best that we could, but the interest wasn't there. I mean, I really felt bad for Irv. He was banging his head against a wall. Very few were listening. So with that being said, how does the federal income tax fit into all of this with the Federal Reserve System, Tina?
Okay, so if we go back to the whole Illuminati plan for New World Order, for the New World Order, if you go back to the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, which was printed in Russia in 1903, It talked about introducing a progressive income tax on wealth. And a progressive income tax is also the second plank of Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, which contained 10 planks for socializing a country. In 1948, Marx and Engels proposed that progressive taxation be used to wrest by degrees all capital from the bourgeoisie to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state. Well, of course, the Fed isn't the state, but the private bankers. Mm-hmm. Anyway, same idea. Yep. I wasn't going to talk about state income tax. I think a lot of states say that if somebody is required to pay a federal income tax, then they're required to pay a state income tax. And also, the constitutionality of a state income tax is much different from a federal income tax, because the Congress, it has enumerated powers, and it can only do what the Constitution allows it to do. The states, on the other hand, can do whatever they want unless the Constitution says it can't or reserves that power for the federal government. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to argue that a state tax is unconstitutional, because it probably is. But in the federal income tax, so as you mentioned, it was enacted in 1913. It's a mechanism to collect the funds to pay the interest on the national debt. So that's how we pay the Federal Reserve its interest, right? And that's the IRS is the collection agency for that. The Reagan-Grace Commission said in 1984 that all the federal income tax goes to pay the national debt. 100% of what is collected is absorbed solely by interest on the federal debt. All individual income tax revenues are gone before one nickel is spent on the services taxpayers expect from government. So if you think that your federal income tax is going to infrastructure or services, no, it's not. And then Ferdinand Lindbergh, he wrote in The Rich and the Super Rich, what the income tax became finally was a siphon gradually inserted into the pocketbooks of the general public. Imposed to popular huzzas as a class tax, the income tax was gradually turned into a mass tax and a jiu-jitsu turnaround. So the Supreme Court had previously found similar income tax laws on labor to be unconstitutional. So the 16th Amendment was enacted to try to get around that, right? So the 16th Amendment reads, "The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived, without apportionment among the several states, and without regard to any census or enumeration." So the federal income tax in the Internal Revenue Code, it only applies to taxable income, which is all gained from activities that are within the authority of the federal government to tax. It also only applies to taxpayers, which is also defined, but I'm not going to get into that here. So income is a gain or a profit. So it's a profit gained through a sale conversion of a capital asset or capital assets, and that's Eisner v. Macomber, which is a Supreme Court case. Another Supreme Court case, Doyle v. Mitchell Brothers Company, says the definition of income conveys the idea of gain or increase arising from corporate activities. So income is a gain, a profit, something of exchangeable value, severed from capital, however invested or employed, and coming in, being derived, that is received or drawn by the recipient for his separate use, benefit, and disposal. That is the income derived from property. Okay, so income is the gain or the profit only. Okay, just so we got that clear. So the federal government can lay two types of taxes, direct and indirect taxes. A direct tax is laid on a person or a property, including income from real estate and personal property. Direct taxes have been limited to taxes on land and appurtenances, and taxes on polls or capitation taxes. And they are subject to apportionment. So the U.S. Constitutional Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 mandates that direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers. In addition, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 4 says, no capitation or other direct taxes shall be laid unless in proportion to the census or enumeration herein before directed to be taken. Okay, so an indirect tax, on the other hand, these are levied upon the happening of an event or an exchange. It is voluntary upon and avoidable by the citizen. For example, the tax can be avoided if one chooses not to engage in the taxed activity. The requirement to pay such taxes, excises, involve the exercise of privileges, and the element of absolute and unavoidable demand is lacking. An excise tax is a tax laid upon the manufacture, sale, or consumption of commodities within the country, upon licenses to pursue certain occupations, and upon corporate privileges. Indirect taxes, including excise taxes, are required to be uniformly laid. So the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, declares that the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes and excises, but all excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. So then uniformity of taxation is defined as a general principle that taxes should be levied in accord with some reasonable system of apportionment. It means that such taxes may only be levied with geographical uniformity, requiring the same plan and the same method to be operative throughout the United States. Okay, so then the 16th Amendment, it's saying where the Congress has the power to lay and collect taxes on income without apportionment and without enumeration. Okay, well, it didn't really seem to achieve what the Congress wanted, because the Supreme Court, has rejected the broad contention that all receipts, everything that comes in, are income within the proper definition of the term gross income, and that the entire proceeds of a conversion of capital assets should be treated as gross income. A mere conversion of capital assets is not to be treated as income. An example of that is stock dividends. Right. We'll get to that too. Okay, and I've been paying tax on stock dividends, and I'm not doing that anymore. And that's Eisner v. Macomber, our Supreme Court case that says that. Okay. So a tax on gross revenue, such as the federal income tax, taxes both capital and income, and is therefore not technically an income tax, because capital is not income. So insofar as it taxes capital, it is a direct tax that must be apportioned. So the 16th Amendment didn't change that. Okay, because it only applies to income, it doesn't change the direct tax. Okay, anyway, so the 16th Amendment did not confer any additional authority to tax on the federal government. It did not extend the taxing power to new subjects. And this is Bushhaber v. Union Pacific Railroad Company, Supreme Court case from 1916. Its sole purpose and effect was to preclude the consideration of the source of income in order to reclassify the tax as a direct tax requiring apportionment. The provision simply prohibited the previous complete and plenary power of income taxation possessed by Congress from being taken out of the category of indirect taxation to which it inherently belonged and being placed in the category of direct taxation subject to apportionment by a consideration of the sources from which the income was derived. There is no federal authority to lay an unapportioned direct tax, which is how the federal income tax is applied. Such a tax is not legal because it's not constitutional. So the 16th Amendment authorizes only a particular character of direct tax without apportionment. That's income, right? And therefore, if a tax is levied under its assumed authority, which does not partake of the characteristics exacted by the 16th Amendment, it is outside of the amendment and is void as a direct tax in the general constitutional sense because it is not apportioned. That's Bushhaber. The 16th Amendment does not authorize a tax on a salary. And it was also not ratified by the required 3/4 or 3/4 of the states. Or it appears not to have been properly ratified by the correct number of states, which is 3/4, right? So there was there was a court case. It was an appellate court. U.S. District Court Judge James C. Fox in Sullivan versus the United States from 2003. He says, I think if you were to go back and try to find and review the ratification of the 16th Amendment, which was the internal revenue, the income tax, I think if you went back and examined that carefully, you would find that a sufficient number of states never ratified that amendment. Mm-hmm. That's just dicta. It doesn't really mean anything, but it's interesting that, a judge is saying that, right? I mean, it's not that it doesn't mean anything, but it's just dicta. It's not like a ruling that he made. It's just, what it said in the court record, right? So anyway, so examples of taxable income are, and these are what Supreme Court cases have said, state bond interest and net revenue of a corporation involved in international shipping. So what would not be taxable income would be revenue made from working. One, the right to work is a fundamental right. And two, a man's labor is his property or his capital. The purchase price for the labor, which requires time and energy, is his wage. The wage earner trades his wage in return for labor, right? This is a quid pro quo exchange and not a profit.
Right.
So, because you can't tax capital. You can't put a direct tax on capital without it being apportioned. That's what they're trying to do when they're taxing labor. And then also, not taxable income is from the employment of children, because the federal government cannot tax those activities that were under the sole and exclusive realm of the states. And this is a 10th Amendment issue. And this was a Supreme Court case, Bailey v. Drexel Furniture Company from 1922. So the 10th Amendment, basically, it helps to define the concept of federalism, which is a relationship between the federal and the state government. So the 10th Amendment says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Okay, so another 10th Amendment issue is the practice of law, which is exclusively within the jurisdiction of the state. An example of that is Tom Cryer, who was an attorney in Shreveport, Louisiana, and he defeated the IRS in federal court. So Tom Cryer, he stopped filing and paying income tax unless and until the government could show him it had the legal right to demand that he do either. He was charged with 2 counts of failure to file. Louisiana federal jury found Cryer not guilty of 2 counts of willful failure to file an income tax return. Cryer had not filed a 1040 return because he believed that the law did not require him to pay income tax on his labor. Cryer's instant victory over the IRS was another serious blow to the IRS's facade of invincibility. And this was 2007 that he won. So another thing that would fall into that is related, that would be a tax on the salary of federal judges. And that's the Supreme Court case Evans v. Gore. Okay, so then, as we mentioned, stock dividends are another thing that are not taxable income because they are conversion of capital from one form to another. Neither under the 16th Amendment nor otherwise has Congress power to tax without apportionment a true stock dividend or the accumulated profit behind it as income of the stockholder. This is Supreme Court case Eisner v. Macomber from 1920. So technically, the federal income tax is an indirect tax, but the 16th Amendment made it a direct tax. And insofar as it taxes capital, not income, which is gain or profit, it has to be apportioned. If not, it is not constitutional. No, this is very complicated law. It took me a long time to get that to be like, okay, this kind of makes sense, but oh Lord.
Yeah, and this is what I meant, Bill and Tina, by the fact that you really got to stay focused on these sorts of issues, because it can really it can cause you to zone out and to to kind of say, you know what, I'll just trust my accountant.
Yeah.
But accountants are not attorneys. Accountants are not attorneys, and they don't understand these legal distinctions.
No.
Well, that's a major. Hey, I've got some questions here, Bill. But let me start with this one, Tina. Speaking of accountants, Are you aware of any CPAs who have argued against the federal income tax?
Why?
Against?
That's their bread and butter. Why would they ever argue against it?
Well, see,
Right?
this is what I mean. This is why we're going to have Tina back, and I'm not buttering her up, believe me, because I didn't even finish my question, and she kind of answered it. The rest of my question was this: any argument against the federal income tax or against the 16th Amendment? Because I wonder where the accounting world would be if it were not for the convoluted and ever-changing tax code.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's
So
it's
your
insane.
answer is no.
No, the tax code. It's like the phone book.
Yeah.
It's that thick and it's so complicated. Like it's difficult for attorneys too. So people get LLMs and tax law, which is like an advanced law degree, just to be able to understand this. But the thing is, like, I took federal income tax law in law school, and they've never talked about the constitutionality of it.
Of course not.
It's always just assumed.
Yeah, I
They don't
wonder
talk
why.
about Eisner v. Macomber or Bush-Haber or any of those court cases. Like, okay, these are just details, I guess.
Right. Right.
Let me guess. You went to a university, Tina.
I did go to university, but not for law school. I went to a private law school.
A private law school?
Yeah.
No
Actually,
federal
I
funding?
went to two private law schools. Because I got an advanced law degree too, but not in tax law. So anyway.
Well, so your answer is no. You don't know of any CPAs that have come out.
No.
I don't.
No, but
No,
there are IRS agents, previous ones like Joe Bannister. They've come out and said there's no law that requires you to file a federal income tax. And and the way the tax code reads, it's like, oh, a tax is imposed, which is kind of a weird. It's not an active like, oh, you are hereby required to pay, blah blah blah. It's really, it's imposed, like it's like a passive way to say it, which is a little bit weird.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also, there's the issue of taxable income and who the taxpayer is too. And I didn't talk about taxpayer, but that's a defined term, and you may not even fit that term as a taxpayer. So,
Bill, jump in here whenever you want, because I've got a few questions here, and
Yeah.
and Tina's our guest, but Bill, I respect your opinions as well. These are issues that I want to hear, both of your answers and opinions on these things, and I kind of want to work backwards
Go ahead.
a little bit here, Tina, when it comes to the question of the fact that the 16th Amendment may not have been ratified by the required 3/4 of the states according to the Constitution, therefore may not be legal. And the reason for that, I don't know if either one of you have heard this as well, is that the vote to a yay or nay vote on the 16th Amendment was up on December the 24th in 1913. So many of our elected representatives at that time were not even there present for the vote.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason for that was because of its proximity to Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And was this a strategic maneuver to get this passed?
well, what do you think?
No doubt.
I guess it's a rhetorical question, but it's one of those things that I'm sure that many people never even think of. And then again, you hear something on this program, you know what? Shoot me or Bill or Tina an email if you have any information that would correct anything that we say. Hey, look, I don't want to live in ignorance, really. I don't want to go on proclaiming something that is wrong when somebody can correct me. I've been corrected all my life, so if any of these things that we say are factually untrue, you know what? Bring it up. So now let me go back to the very beginning of what you were talking, when you first started talking about the reason for the federal income tax. And again, we're talking about 1913. And as you said, Tina, that it was introduced and implemented to collect funds to pay the interest on the national debt. Did we not have a national debt before 1913?
Well, okay, so when the Federal Reserve, it was enacted at the same time, right? They were enacted together because when the Federal Reserve creates money, it creates, you have to pay interest. So the government has to pay interest to the Federal Reserve. So guess who the government's going to get that money from? From the taxpayers.
Yep.
So that's where your federal income tax goes. It goes to the Federal Reserve because you're paying the interest on the debt, the money that the government owes to the Federal Reserve.
Oh.
So they had to be enacted together because the Federal Reserve wants to guarantee they're going to get paid.
So then, just to be clear, prior to 1913, the federal government did not owe money to anyone?
Well, they may have owed it to, banks or, they had, they had the greenbacks at that point. That Abraham Lincoln.
But they print.
So they could print. The Treasury could print.
Right.
There was no interest. Now, I don't know if there was any national debt for the federal government before 1913, but it wasn't to the Federal Reserve.
Okay. And so, go ahead, Bill.
No, keep going, Joe. I'm gonna jump in with something when you get finished.
Okay, I thought you had a question right now. Okay, with regards to the national debt, Tina, I don't know if you've come across this at all, but that my understanding was that the rationale for instituting the federal income tax was to pay for World War I. Are you aware of that at all?
Well, they definitely instigated World War I after that happened. So, I mean, there's a connection there.
Yeah, and the rate, did it not start out at a 0.5%, the federal income tax across the board, like 0.5%?
Oh, and then it got raised gradually, of course. Yeah.
Okay, so we've had it gradually over time to where, I mean, what are the highest income tax rates paid today? I don't know.
30-something.
Are some people paying half of their income to federal income taxes?
I'm not 100% sure what the highest tax rate is, but you have to. The more money you make, the more percentage you have to pay. That's the progressive part of it.
Yep.
So it's not like everybody just pays 25 or 35%. It's the more you make, the more you have to pay. I'm sorry, I don't have that figure offhand. But I think some people do pay like at least 50%. Like in Europe, they have to pay 50%.
Yeah.
See, here's another interesting comment that you made that I want to delve into a little bit here. When you talk about the definition of income, that the idea of gain or increase, that it is, and I assume that this is from a court ruling.
Yes.
The definition of an income is the idea of gain or increase arising from corporate activities. So when you talk about the personal income tax, how does that figure in when we as individuals are not corporations?
Okay, so if you sell a piece of property or you sell stocks or something and you make profit off of that, that would be income, and that would be taxable income. But if you are just working and making money, then that's a tax on your capital. because you've traded your time and your energy for that money, and that is a quid pro quo exchange. You're not just getting money for free.
Right.
So that would be taxing your capital. So that would be a direct tax on your capital, which would then have to be apportioned, because the 16th Amendment only takes income out of being apportioned, not capital.
Bill?
This is the part where
I know it's confusing.
No, this is the part where my earlobes start getting red when we're talking about this.
But
go ahead. What were you going to say, Joe?
Well, I was, and again, Joe, I don't want to monopolize the time here. I mean, but thank goodness I have all this room in my basement where I'm pacing. The angrier I get, the more room I have to pace back and forth from the front of my house to the back of my house, back to the front, well, whatever. I think Tina just came up. I've looked at definitions of income, tax, court cases, SCOTUS rulings, state rulings, philosophers, politicians, theologians. I think our guest has defined what income is.
Yeah.
The only thing that matters is what the Supreme Court says.
She doesn't even know.
The only thing that matters is what the Supreme Court says, okay? And so Doyle v. Mitchell
I don't agree with that, but go ahead.
No, in law, the only thing that matters is what the Supreme Court says. So when they say what taxable income is, the IRS doesn't get to say, oh, but we think it's blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, it's what the Supreme Court says.
Yeah, I understand that.
The Supreme Court is the law of the land. Nobody gets to say what the law is except the Supreme Court.
Right. That is the rule of law. But guess what? The rule of law changes all the time, doesn't it?
Well, these are old cases, and they have never been overturned. Like, Eisner v. Macomber is from 1920, Doyle v. Mitchell Brothers is from 1918. These still stand.
So no one has challenged these cases, is what you're saying?
They've never been overturned, no.
Wow.
I'm trying to pay you a compliment, and you're not accepting it.
I'm sorry.
I haven't.
Sorry. Okay, go ahead.
I think you have defined what income is.
Oh,
you said it. I don't know if you heard it or Bill heard it. You said it real quickly. You said money for free.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically, sure. You sell something like a corporation that's selling gadgets, they make an income, sure, that's taxable. That doesn't, that's a gain. That's an income. That doesn't have to be apportioned because the 16th Amendment doesn't make it be apportioned. But your labor is not income, it's capital, so then it would have to be apportioned, and it's not, so then it's not constitutional.
Mm-hmm.
And really, I am not trying to be funny here. I think that is a tremendous definition of what income is, and it is why, and I guess if you want to elaborate, Tina or Bill, you want to chime in, the difference between income and labor. To me, the federal income tax, along with the state income tax and the local income tax, they're misnomers. They are wage taxes. They are taxes on our wages.
That's right.
And it's important to understand, and Tina brought it out, what a quid pro quo is. It's a favor for a favor. There is no profit. There is an exchange that takes place. Mm-hmm. If I work for 8 hours, my labor, in exchange for 8 hours of wages, whatever the determinations between that and the person that's going to pay me, the government has no right, I don't believe legally, to come in and take a portion of that. And let me be clear before we even move on. We don't pay.
No,
I repeat, we do not pay federal income, or state or local income taxes. They are confiscated from us. It's a confiscatory system of taxation. We don't pay they know that if we had to do it personally, we wouldn't do it.
Yeah. Because
it's so darn immoral. So they have the employers, and that's another violation of the Constitution. Tell me what... Well, let me say this, and then you go ahead, Tina.
I'm just going to say there is a way to write a letter to the employers and say you don't want your federal income tax withheld.
Mm.
So that you can then use that money to maybe make money off of it, and then you pay your taxes at that, when you're supposed to pay it or whatever. But see, because when they take that money from you, they're taking it early. You can't use it. You can't make money off of it. It's like, why would you do that?
Mm-hmm. And how well known is that provision?
Oh, you know what? Not very well. I have used it before, but it's been a long time. I don't remember what it was offhand.
Okay, but, and I think that is that not also strategic?
Well, yeah. I mean, you want to use your money if you can, even if you're just getting interest off of it.
Yep.
I mean, whatever.
So then, why wouldn't accountants who are not direct employees of federal, state, or local governments make that aware to their clients?
Well, they might not know. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't know what an accountant is. I'm an attorney. Okay.
I think you're right. I think they don't know, Tina, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Bill?
But people should look at it. Just look at, federal income tax, write a letter to the employer to not withhold the federal income tax. And if nothing else, just, put it into the credit union, get as much interest off of it as you can, and then pay it at the end of, when you're supposed to in April. That's what I would do.
All right, I just have one thing. Tina, when I was 13 years old, I started working after school, working in a hardware store, right? And this is a long time. This is back in the 70s. So in any event, the following April, when I was 14 years old, I filed my first 1040 form. Right? Now, what happened when I did that? When I filed my first 1040 form, what did I do?
Well, then, you put yourself in the system.
Yep.
So if you don't file again, then they're going to notice probably.
So don't. Now, I've heard it described this way: when you file a 1040 form for the first time, you've now given yourself. You've taken away what you've described here as a wage that is in return for labor, because you've now voluntarily entered into the IRS collection system, and you have willingly given over your wage.
Yeah, but that's only on a yearly basis, because when I was talking about Tom Cryer, the lawyer who didn't file, he had filed previously to that, and then he's like, I'm not filing anymore. And he didn't file for 10 years, and they went after him for 2 of those years.
Right.
So
that was going to be my next question.
And he won because they couldn't prove that he had to pay it.
Right.
But that's income on his, that's his wage or his salary. It's not technically an income. An income is if you're selling stocks or property, right? Or canned goods or whatever, but not a wage.
Yeah.
So,
right.
If I'm not, okay, like I said, I'm not paying income tax on stock dividends anymore, but I will on stock sales. Because that's income.
Because that's income. So if you have 3,000 shares of Facebook and you sell it, you bought Facebook at X amount of dollars and it's now worth whatever it is now. That's your profit.
Went up a lot recently. Yeah, that's your profit. That's your income. Okay, fine. That's legitimate.
Right.
I don't think Facebook pays dividends, but Apple does. And if you're getting dividends, that's a conversion of capital. That is not taxable income.
That is not taxable income. Even though there's a part on that 1040 form that says that you have to report that stock dividend.
Well, guess who controls the Supreme Court, not the IRS.
Mm-hmm.
The law
And
is
this is the issue.
Court.
This is
Yeah.
the issue, that the IRS doesn't follow the Constitution.
Well, they have to, or it's not constitutional. They don't. They're not. They're not above the Supreme Court. Nobody is.
Say that again, Tina?
Nobody is above the Supreme Court when it comes to law. Marbury v. Madison, 1803 case, said the Supreme Court is the ultimate arbiter of the law. So whatever they say goes.
Well, brother, you're gonna.
Yeah.
You may be having to take some of my stock to bail me out here in the in the near future.
And also, you know, people like Wesley Snipes.
Yeah.
You know, he didn't pay federal income tax, but he didn't make the right arguments. You know, Tom Cryer made the right arguments. Of course, he was prevented from making some of the arguments because the court system is, well, it's corrupt, all right?
Mm-hmm.
But he made constitutional arguments, you know, and so I don't know what Wesley Snipes was arguing, but he lost. He went to jail, so I'm guessing he didn't make constitutional arguments.
Yeah.
So when people say, you know, they just assume that this whole area of federal income tax is like settled and you have to pay it. It's like, no, there's Supreme Court cases and it's very nuanced actually, that you know, if people are going and making the wrong arguments and losing, well, anyway, it just kind of gives the impression that everything is like on the up and up. But look at Tom Cryer. You know, he put out his court briefs for people to read, and you know, look at all the law and everything. And he was on YouTube. He's passed away since then, but he put a lot of really good information out there. So check it out.
Oh yeah.
How do you spell his last name there?
Cryer.
Okay. And let's also remember that we've mentioned the IRS quite a few times here in the last half an hour or so. They are the boogeyman. Mm-hmm. They are the ones that receive most of the heat. But let's remember that it is Congress that gives the IRS its power. The IRS is merely the tool of Congress to extract the money from the citizenry. So if you have a problem with the Federal Reserve System, with the federal income tax, with the 16th Amendment, the place to not go is IRS headquarters anywhere. It is to contact your federal congressman to voice a grievance. Mm-hmm. Going to the IRS is just going to the middleman. So, Tina, before we move on, one more thing, and I think that this is very important. You've mentioned one. It's funny how words are mentioned and discussed, and they can be kind of glossed over and forgotten. This word, apportionment, the concept of apportionment, and according to Webster's dictionary, it is to make a proportionate division or distribution of. And, you know, again, going back to my simple mind, I think of it and I wonder how it is that individuals in remote Oregon, and there is an actual town called Remote, R-E-M-O-T-E, Oregon, pay the same federal income tax rates of those living in Manhattan, New York, when the amount of federal money going to remote Oregon is minuscule compared to the federal dollars flowing to New York City. So could you talk a little bit before we move on about this idea of apportionment? And is my concern there legitimate or not?
Well, because it's progressive, I mean, the people that are not making as high as salary or, well, I don't want to say salary because that's not even taxable income. And yeah, so, well, the progressive nature of it is the more you make, the more you have to pay, percentage-wise. So, is that...
Yeah, but the idea is, and just to be clear on it, is that you're paying these taxes for a reason, for services, for government services. It's not going out into the ethereal world. It is for a reason. So the people of remote Oregon are not receiving the same amount of federal dollars or services that they would be that they are in New York City. So my contention is that, and I guess this goes to the idea of apportionment, is that somebody living in such a remote area should be paying less than someone living in an urban area such as New York City or Philadelphia or Seattle or Los Angeles. I mean, do you agree or disagree?
Well, are you suggesting that people are getting services for the federal income tax they pay? Are you suggesting that they're getting something in return for the federal income tax they're paying?
I am, and if they're not,
they're not.
Okay, then why am I paying it?
It's going to the Federal Reserve for their service of giving the government money in return for the interest that they get to collect from all of us.
Wow.
Yeah, see, that's why... Okay.
So then that, Tina, and I think I was trying to get you to say that in a roundabout way.
Okay.
That, to me, is a reason for a tax revolt. You know, I'm not a tax... And I've said this before, Bill, on previous programs. Mm-hmm. I'm not a tax protester. As a believer, I understand that we're supposed to pay taxes for government working for us. But I'm against bad taxes. I'm against illegal taxes. I'm against immoral taxes. I'm against the taxation system that we have set up now, which is why, before we move on, I've always said, and you know, Bill and Tina, there's always been a dog and pony show with regards to how we should collect taxes. Back in the 80s, like I said, we had this tax revolt, and there were some congressmen. I remember Billy Tauzin was going around, and he was supporting a flat tax, like a 10% tax, and I was against that as well. I am totally for a consumption tax, a tax where you pay the taxes when you go buy a goods, not services, just goods. When you go buy food, and I'm including milk and eggs and all the stuff that are necessary, or if you go buy a tent, or if you go buy a car, that's when I want to pay my taxes. I don't think the federal government has any business being involved in my business. They shouldn't know where I work, who I work for, what I spend on tools, how many miles a year that I drive, all the things that come under the 16th Amendment, the federal income tax amendment, the evil that has spawned, I am totally against. The intrusion of the federal government into my private life. Just let me pay my taxes when I go buy things, and that's it.
Yeah, like a sales tax. Well, the problem I have with
right.
Yeah, the problem I have with the federal income tax is it's completely unnecessary. Because the Federal Reserve doesn't need to be doing that. The Treasury could be doing it, and they wouldn't charge interest, and we wouldn't have to pay a federal income tax. I don't have a problem with sales taxes. I don't have a problem with, even property taxes, whatever. My problem is that the way it's set up, it's not applied constitutionally. Just because I'm a lawyer, right? It's like the 16th Amendment didn't get the job done. Like the way they worded it. Like if they just said, look, any direct tax, indirect tax, doesn't matter. It can be laid on income and don't worry about apportionment, none of that stuff. Be like, okay, well, we can't really do much about that, right? But that's not how they word it. They did not word it correctly. So it's being applied to stuff that it shouldn't be applied to. Like your labor. Because then it has to be apportioned, because that's the direct tax, not on income, but on capital. So even if they just fix that, be like, all right, well, it's constitutional. There's not much you can do about it, except get rid of the Federal Reserve and then get rid of the federal income. Get rid of Federal Reserve, get rid of federal income tax, right? Because that's necessary.
Agreed, 100%, Tina. From your lips to God's ears. I don't believe that being a pessimist, understanding who controls this world, I don't think that'll ever happen. But again, from your lips to God's ears, let's hope that at least people start talking about it in the mainstream and it's not confined to the internet like shows like we're producing tonight. And how many times have I said before we move on? This also goes to the size of government. I don't care what Republicans are out there who say that they want to reduce the size of government. Again, I go back to what Irv Homer said back in the 70s. He started saying there isn't a dime's worth of difference between a Republican and a Democrat, and I don't think that's any more clear, any more true than it is today. They can get up and make their speeches all they want as far as the size of government, but when it comes to what the federal government and state governments and local governments pay for is not examined, it's not scrutinized, it's just overlooked completely. When you have a township meeting, how many people go to a township meeting? We have the local township meeting here in Hatboro broadcast on the local radio station here in Hatboro. How many people listen to it? I listen to it because I'm out of my friggin' mind. So, how many people care about where their money is spent? How many people care that that here in Philadelphia over $1 billion was spent? And Tina, you're not going to know this, but you'll know it now. Over $1 billion was spent to build 2 playpens, 3 playpens, 4 playpens. The Philadelphia Phillies baseball stadium, the Eagles football stadium, the Steelers football stadium, and the Pirates baseball stadium. Now, what business is that of the government? Bill, I've said this 100 times before. Maybe Tina's audience isn't aware of this. And I'm sure, Tina, your local municipality there, your state government in Washington has paid, in part, for the Seattle Seahawks football stadium and the baseball stadium for the Mariners out there. Now, what business is it of the government, our governments, to be paying for ballparks and football stadiums for private owners? What business is it of theirs to take my money, Tina's money, Bill's money, to build these playpens for these millionaire ball players and these billionaire owners, folks? Nobody's ever answered that question.
Well, I don't think they do.
You don't think they do what?
You're preaching to the choir here. I can see building roads and parks or whatever, but not.
Yeah, that's called infrastructure,
right.
Bridges, roads, lights, levees, stuff like that. Not ballparks, folks. But like I said, hey, Bill, please, how many times have I said, nobody cares that their money was taken and built these playpens for these billionaires. Nope. If they don't care about that, what the hell? What are they going to care about? Let's move on, please. I've got a. You guys know what a lally column is?
No.
It's a metal support beam for your 2x12s that support your floor. It's made out of metal. If we don't move on, I'm going to smash my head into this lally column. I'm going to crush my head in. Bill, can you ask the next question, please?
Yeah, sure. I got to get that picture out of my mind first. Tina did.
You're going to be doing my funeral soon, brother. I'm telling you.
I hear you, Joe.
And you're part of it, Tina.
So, Tina, did the U.S. taxpayer money bail out banks during the 2007-2008 financial crisis?
Why, yes, Bill, they did. Imagine that.
Yeah.
So a few unelected elite are able to dictate how taxpayer money is spent. They demand welfare for their Wall Street buddies. They force taxpayers to prop up failed institutions. So taxpayers have been forced to bail out the too-big-to-fail banks to the tune of trillions of dollars. The U.S. Treasury ponied up $700 billion to save the nation's banks in September 2008, Forbes reported, and the Treasury's actual commitment was $16.8 trillion. David Wiley, who wrote for Bloomberg, said that a secretive group deploying billions of dollars to favor banks operating with little oversight by the public or elected officials, the New York Fed, it's in the hot seat for its decision in November 2008 to buy out for about $30 billion insurance contracts AIG sold on toxic debt securities to banks, including Goldman Sachs, Merrill Lynch, Societe Generale, and Deutsche Bank, among others. That decision, critics say, amounted to backdoor bailout for the banks. So then he also wrote that when elected and unaccountable agencies, Federal Reserve isn't really an agency, but anyway, they pick banking winners while trying to unrun Congress, even as taxpayers are forced to lend, spend, and guarantee about $8 trillion to prop up the financial system. Our collective blood should boil. Now, people want a really good account of the financial crisis and all of the fraud that was going on. I recommend The Big Short. That's such a good movie. But so now, however,
wait, Tina, say that movie again. I didn't catch it.
The Big Short.
The Big Short.
The Big Short. It was up for an Academy Award last 2 years ago. Anyway, it's really worth it. But so taxpayers had to bail out these banks, but now even worse. Well, it's worse if you have your money in a bank. It's worse. Now they want to have bail-ins. So this happened at first in Cyprus. So if the bank needs money, they will just take the depositor's money. Okay, take money out of your account. So in the spring of 2013, the failing European Bank of Cyprus performed a bail-in that required depositors to help save the bank by foregoing a large portion of the money they had deposited in the bank. In return, depositors were given equity shares in the failing bank. Great. Yeah.
Boy, what a great exchange that is.
Yeah. Here's some Enron stock. How's that?
Yeah, right.
Customers who deposit money in banks are lending that money to the bank. Depositors are, in effect, unsecured creditors. If the bank fails, depositors get in line with other unsecured creditors to see how many cents on the dollar, if any, they can retrieve. So the Federal Reserve has okayed the bail-in rule, which is to take effect in January 2019. So under the proposed bail-in scenario, the failure of a systematically important bank, i.e. too big to fail, will receive no government funding to stay afloat. In order to keep their doors open, a too big to fail bank will just call on their loyal depositors to help out by taking whatever percentage of the depositors' money they need to stabilize the bank.
Incredible.
So the banks where this could happen, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, Capital One, Bank of New York Mellon Corporation, U.S. Bank Corp, and PNC Financial Services Group. So if you have money in any of those,
Get it out.
you might be losing it. Oh, but you'll get some shares in the bank. So.
Yeah, right. Unbelievable. Thanks for your 20,000. Here's $8.40 on your.
Yeah, it's like Lehman Brothers. You know what? It's about to go out of business. Oh my God.
Wow.
So these financial institutions made bad investment decisions. Giving them money simply rewards bad behavior. So if the free market were allowed to function, the poorly run financial institutions would collapse, as they should. Unfortunately, in a command economy run by private bankers, taxpayers, or depositors are forced to prop them up.
Yep. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Joe, I'm coming over to bang my head against that same post.
I've got 2 rally columns here, Bill. You can have one of them.
So I just want to mention that the FDIC, we talked about that last time, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, it does insure bank deposits up to $250,000, but it is underfunded, and if there is a large bank failure, it probably wouldn't be able to cover all of that. Mm-hmm. So I think depositors' money, even if there's an FDIC, it could still be at risk. I mean, I would just be careful.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
What were the private banks that were bailed out, Tina? Could you repeat that again?
Oh,
by the taxpayers?
Yeah. So Goldman Sachs, Merrill Lynch, Societe Generale, Deutsche Bank, and there were others, but I don't have a list for that. Now, remember I said there was no accountability for the Fed?
Mm-hmm.
I think they were asked. Ben Bernanke was asked in Congress which banks were bailed out and all of that stuff, and he just refused to tell them.
Mm-hmm.
So let me see if I can find that real quick.
Wait a minute. Congress asked Bernanke which banks were bailed out? Is that what you said?
Let me just find that really quick.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
I remember... Oh, yeah. So, okay, this is what I had. During testimony to Congress in 2009, then Chairman Ben Bernanke refused to reveal to committee members the names of the institutions that received trillions of dollars in bailout money from the Fed. Later, he refused to disclose the identity of the foreign banks that were parties to sweetheart deals with the Federal Reserve.
If he refused to answer, why would he not be held in contempt of Congress?
Good question.
Okay. Yeah, it is very strange to say the least. Also, it goes to this again, the lackadaisical American. When it comes to bailing out private enterprise, and make no mistake about it, correct me if I'm wrong, Tina, banks are private.
Yeah, the Federal Reserve banks are private. That was the 12 regional banks are private. That was Lewis v. United States. That was a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal case from 1982. Found that those banks were definitely private corporations. The Federal Reserve is kind of a hybrid, though, because the Board of Governors is appointed by the president.
Right. And then I don't know if you will remember, Tina or Bill, back in, I think it was 2006, thereabouts, that General Motors Corporation was bailed out by the federal taxpayers.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
You remember that, Tina?
Vaguely, yeah.
Yeah. I guess
Chrysler was another one back in, I think, the 80s, right?
A motor corporation?
Chrysler Motor Corporation, yep. They were bailed out as well.
This idea of the taxpayers bailing out, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation is one thing. bailing out General Motors, and I don't have the numbers before me. I'll have them at a future date. I remember getting into a conversation. Let me back up. Bailing out General Motors and bailing out these banks to the tune, I'm sure, of billions. Would you say billions, Tina? As far
If
as the
not
banks?
trillions. If not trillions, yeah.
If not trillions. These private failures, okay? And I'll reduce it to a conversation. And again, I'll go back to I like to reduce things to it in its simplest form. I had a conversation back in a church where Bill and I used to go with an individual who at the time was, he wasn't a young guy with young thinking. He was an older guy who I'd expected to be wise, but I was shocked to hear his response. We were talking about the General Motors bailout, and I had said to him, I said, I disagree 100% with a taxpayer bailout of a private corporation, and his response was, well, if you don't bail them out, then it's going to mean the loss of jobs, it's going to mean a crashed economy, it's going to mean suffering for many thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, millions of Americans. And I said, you know what, brother? If that's the way it has to be, then that's the way it has to be. We have to start thinking differently, okay? We have to start trusting, in that context, I'm thinking about the Lord, that if you're worried about a collapsed America, if you're a Christian, then your faith is weak, okay? And if you're thinking along the lines of a secularist, you have to start thinking differently. You cannot start excusing the failure you cannot continue to excuse the failure of private organizations that are being bailed out by your tax dollars. Something has to change. That has to change, number one. Because even if it means suffering brings forth renewal. Suffering brings forth a new time. Okay? You can't rely on the taxpayers to bail out your failures as a private bank or a private car company or a private anything. Because when you have that mindset, then nothing will ever change. It'll always be on the responsibility of the taxpayers, and big business will be able to continue to operate the way it's always operated, with reckless abandon. If we fail, the taxpayers will bail us out.
Right.
To me, it's a general philosophy that I completely disagree with.
Well,
I want to get to a. Go ahead, Tina. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, in that movie, The Big Short, the big banks were just dealing with all this toxic debt, these mortgage-backed securities that were just terrible mortgages that people weren't going to be able to pay. And the banks, they didn't care because they knew they would get bailed out by the taxpayers.
Right.
Like, if they had actually, well, they would have all collapsed, but,
Look,
it's too bad for the side, right?
That's exactly my point, Gina. If you change the way people think, you change the way big business thinks. If they live on the philosophy that we don't have to worry about failure because we'll be bailed out, if you change that thinking, then things will change.
Right.
If you think along those secular terms, it goes even further than that, Tina and Bill. Bill, I think that you're aware of this. Tina, I don't know if you're aware of this. We have something called the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, OPIC, OPIC, not OPEC, OPIC. And Paul Manafort, Donald Trump's campaign manager, was the president of OPIC. Now, what is OPIC? The Overseas Private Investment Corporation is a taxpayer-funded federal organization that guarantees the if you have a business that is overseas against nationalization. If I have a company that makes sugar in Nicaragua, and all of a sudden the Nicaraguan government nationalizes my business, and I lose that business because the Nicaraguan government has confiscated it and nationalized it, the taxpayers of this country, as a result of the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, will refund me and pay me my losses, restore my financial indebtedness as a result of the nationalization of my business.
Wow.
And that is still in operation today. The Overseas Private Investment Corporation. This is one of those things where people just don't understand what the heck what the government is doing.
Yeah.
Now, why should, if somebody wants to start an XYZ company over in Nicaragua, why should I have to guarantee their business? You take the risk. You pay for it if that government collapses or that government takes your business as a result of nationalization. And it happens all the time.
Yeah, so the taxpayer takes the risk but doesn't get any of the reward of that business.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't get any of the reward. Tina and Bill, it really goes back to responsibility. And my goodness, I think this whole series with the Federal Reserve System has to do with the responsibility. I mean, one of the things that you brought about that really struck me, Tina, was in your research, and this is something that I've really thought about, is that businesses prior to the Federal Reserve System, they funded their expansions on their own profits. They didn't rely on the banks. And boy, oh boy, how we've gotten away from that. How we've gotten to the point where we think that, well, I can go and borrow the money. This is what I said an hour and a half ago or whatever. Buy now and pay later. Instead of building your business, and it all goes back to mindset. If my business succeeds, I can take the profits from my business and build my business up, not go to the banks.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, the system that's in place since way back in the early 20th century has gotten Americans thinking, and I dare I say the world, all of the industrialized nations that have central banks, they're thinking away from private corporate. There is such a thing as a family corporation.
Yeah.
You ever hear of that, Tina? A family corporation?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Where you have a genetic family, a biological family, an extended family that comes together and they pool their money, and instead of going to the bank, how much wealth, if all of your relatives got together, Bill, and pooled their money, or Tina, all of your relatives got together and pooled their money, how much wealth is there in the Foster family or the Posey family, or is there in my Marodi family? Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. But what happens? We don't trust each other.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, we go to complete strangers and borrow money. We could be borrowing from our own families, buying shares in our own families, and whoever has the most shares gets the most. All the money stays in the family. I think, and if you guys have any information, correct me. I think this is how the Pakistanis do it when they buy the 7-Elevens, the Indians, how they buy the Dunkin' Donuts. I don't think they go to banks. I swear, I think they do it within themselves. So much for not being a big mouth, huh? I can't resist it, but it astonishes me, Bill and Tina, how we've gotten to this point, and
it does.
You know how we don't think about a $20+ trillion national debt. How we listen to, and I'm listening to Pennsylvania, the budget, the state budget going through, not being rubber stamped, and I'm thinking how all this works. Nobody really knows. Nobody really takes the time to think about it. It's just mind-boggling. Well, let's start in your own home. In your own home. And look, I'm as guilty as the next person. I know that I've messed up financially. Probably that has to do with me investigating how we got into this business to begin with. So, you take your personal circumstances and you magnify that 1 trillion times over, and that's where we are nationally. Yep. And Bill and Tina, I think that Tina, I think you alluded to this, or Bill, both of you alluded to it earlier. It's somewhere there's got to be a bursting of this bubble, a bursting of this credit bubble. There's got to be some sort of, and this is my opinion, that there's got to be some sort of financial crisis that's looming. And we talked about, false flags and events that might usher in the new world order. My thinking is that one of the main players is going to be a financial crisis that the world is going to be in such a financial mess. It might be hard to see right now, but at some point the world is going to be in such a financial mess that there are going to be those who come along who say, here's the answer to this. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big part of your new world order. Mm-hmm. A world currency. And I think, Bill, and you and Tina would know more about that than me. You guys are more financially astute than I am, but I just look out on the landscape and I think that how much longer can we go on with a false currency that we have in this country and that we have with all the industrialized nations that have a central bank and have fiat currency? And how long can that play out for? Yeah. I mean, it doesn't really matter to those that are in control. What do they have to lose? As Tina said, they create the boom and bust cycles. Yep. It's just the peons like us three and everybody listening to us tonight, the ones that suffer. So how do you prepare for? Hey, I don't know if you guys want to go into a third hour.
It's fine with me.
Yeah, we're coming up on 9 o'clock on the East Coast, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So you're listening to Answers for the Paranormal. Our guest tonight, Tina Foster. And Tina's been with us the past 3 weeks, and we've been discussing the Federal Reserve System, central banking, and progressive income tax, which we've focused on mainly tonight, the progressive income tax. So I guess we are going to go into hour 3 here. And Tina, so we've been talking about all this bailout and everything, and the situation that we're in, that I think that David Riley put it very well, that our collective blood should be boiling. Or is there any alternative to the Federal Reserve? What is the solution to all this?
Okay, so Thomas Jefferson said that the issuing power of money should be taken from banks and restored to Congress and the people to whom it belongs. Bank paper must be suppressed, and the circulating media must be restored to the nation to whom it belongs. It is the only fund on which they can rely for loans. It is the only resource which can never fail them, and it is an abundant one for every necessary purpose. Okay, so he wanted the Treasury to be doing all of this, not a central bank. So Abraham Lincoln, during the Civil War, he went to Chase Bank to finance the war, but they wanted 24 to 36% interest, and he said thanks, but no thanks. So he went to Congress and he got them to issue Treasury notes, the greenbacks, and these were non-interest-bearing notes which saved taxpayers interest, and these were actually in circulation until 1994. Lincoln said the government should create, issue, and circulate all the currency and credits needed to satisfy the spending power of the government and the buying power of consumers. By the adoption of these principles, the taxpayers will be saved immense sums of interest. So the banks were not very happy about this. There was an editorial in the Times of London from 1862 said, if this mischievous financial policy, which has its origins in North America, shall be endured down to a fixture, then that government will furnish its own money without cost. God forbid, right? It will pay off its debt and be without debt. It will have all the money necessary to carry on its commerce. It will become prosperous without precedence in the history of the world. The brains and the wealth of all countries will go to North America. That country must be destroyed, or it will destroy every monarchy on the globe. James Buell, who was of the American Bankers Association, they were not happy either. He said, it is advisable to do all in your power to sustain such prominent daily and weekly newspapers as will oppose the greenback issue of paper money, and that you will also withhold patronage from all applicants for loans who are not willing to oppose the government issue of money. To repeal the act creating banknotes or to restore to circulation the government issue of money will be to provide the people with money and will therefore seriously affect our individual profits as bankers and lenders. And then Lincoln said, I have two great enemies, the Southern Army in front of me and the bankers in the rear. Of the two, the one at my rear is my greatest foe. And actually, we mentioned before that Russia was the last European or major European country to fall to the central banks. Yep. Well, back during the Civil War, Tsar Alexander II of Russia, he backed Lincoln against the bankers. And basically, if England or France had intervened to help the South, Russia would have declared war on them. Wow. So that kept England and France out of the war. So Gerald G. McGeer was a researcher from Canada, and he wrote that John Wilkes Booth, who assassinated Lincoln, he said that Booth was hired by international bankers to assassinate Lincoln because of his policy of greenback currency. They, the bankers, were then interested in the establishment of the gold standard money system and the right of the bankers to manage the currency and credit of every nation in the world. With Lincoln out of the way, they were able to proceed with that plan. Within 8 years after Lincoln's assassination, silver was demonetized and the gold standard money system set up in the United States. And Ernest Syed was an agent for the Bank of England. He said, I went to America in the winter of 1872 to 1873 to secure the passage of a bill demonetizing silver. It was in the interest of those I represented, the governors of the Bank of England, to have it done. By 1873, gold coins were the only form of coin money, and the gold was controlled by the bankers. So Otto von Bismarck, who was Chancellor of Germany, he said the death of Lincoln was a disaster for Christendom. There was no man in the United States great enough to wear his boots, and the bankers went anew to grab the riches. I fear that foreign bankers with their craftiness and tortuous tricks will entirely control the exuberant riches of America and use it to systematically corrupt civilization.
Wow.
Yeah, so then Kennedy, JFK, in 1963, he signed executive order. There's some noise going on. What is that?
Say that again, Tina?
There's some noise going on. Are y'all hearing that?
I've been trying to figure that out for the last half hour.
Okay. Well, I hope it's not too disconcerting for people. But anyway, so Kennedy, he signed Executive Order 11110 in 63, which gave the Treasury Department the power to issue silver certificates as the base for U.S. currency. But previously, the president could do that on his own authority. So there is one theory that once enough silver certificates were in existence, they would eliminate the demand for Federal Reserve notes. And Jim Mars, who wrote in Crossfire that Kennedy was trying to transfer power from the Federal Reserve to the United States Department of the Treasury, and that forces opposed to such action might have played some part in the assassination. And they point to this banker, John J. McCoy, who was appointed to the Warren Commission, and this guy was former president for the World Bank and Chase Manhattan. But, on the other hand, G. Edward Griffin says he doesn't agree with this assassination theory. He says the purpose of the order of 11110 and the legislation was to decrease the circulation of silver certificates, with Federal Reserve notes taking their place. As economic activity grew and prices rose in the 1950s and 60s, the need for small denomination currency grew at the same time that the price of silver increased. The Treasury required silver for the increasing number of silver certificates and coins needed for transactions, but the price of silver was rapidly approaching the point that the silver in the coins and in reserve for their certificates was worth more than the face value of the money. To conserve on the silver needs of the Treasury, Kennedy requested legislation to bring the issuance of silver certificates to an end and to authorize the Fed to issue small denomination notes, which it could not do at the time. In October 1964, the Treasury ceased issuing silver certificates altogether. So this is after Kennedy was assassinated. If anything, EO 11110 enhanced Federal Reserve power and did not in any way reduce it. The proponents of the JFK myth assert that Kennedy was assassinated because he was about to issue silver certificates, thereby denying the bankers their customary interest payments on the national currency. However, the reality was just the opposite. Okay, well, even if that's true, and even if Kennedy was not trying to undermine the Fed with the silver certificates, the U.S. government could still take a page out of Lincoln's book and pay off the U.S. bonds with debt-free Treasury notes. So they could reissue greenbacks, right? The Treasury could. They could abolish, or the U.S. government could abolish fractional reserve lending, and the reserve requirement of banks would be raised as the debt was paid off to prevent inflation. And eventually, the reserve requirement would be 100% and not 10%. The U.S. government could also repeal the Federal Reserve Act and the National Banking Act, which would abolish the Fed and transfer monetary policy back to the Treasury. The U.S. could also withdraw from the IMF, the BIS, and the World Bank. So the Bank for International Settlements, International Monetary Fund. So then, before Alan Greenspan was the head of the Fed, he actually advocated for a return to the gold standard.
Of course he did.
Yeah. So he said that under the gold standard, a free banking system stands as a protector of an economy's stability and balanced growth. Government deficit spending under a gold standard is severely limited because the credit is limited by the tangible assets. So however much gold you have, that's how much money you have, right? Gold and silver are seen as the enemy by governments because they constrain spending. The gold standard is incompatible with chronic deficit spending, the hallmark of the welfare state, because the welfare state is nothing more than a mechanism by which government confiscates the wealth of the productive members of a society to support a wide variety of welfare schemes.
Boy, so true.
The abandonment of the gold standard made it possible for the welfare statist to use the banking system as a means to an unlimited expansion of credit. In the absence of the gold standard, there is no way to protect state savings from confiscation through inflation. There is no safe store of value. If there were, the government would have to make its holding illegal, as was done in the case of gold, because FDR confiscated gold in 1933, right? So the financial policy of the welfare state requires that there be no way for the owners of wealth to protect themselves. This is the shabby secret of the welfare state's tirades against gold. Deficit spending is simply a scheme for the hidden confiscation of wealth. Gold stands in the way of this insidious process. It stands as a protector of property rights. And Ron Paul also advocated for a return to the gold standard. And if these things actually happen, then you can expect retribution from the Fed and the bankers, that they'll try to crash the stock market, contract the money supply, maybe cause a depression. Now, as far as what the states can do, some of them want to provide an alternative to the Fed's fiat currency, and these are like Arizona, Louisiana, Utah, Texas, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Idaho, Kansas, and Missouri. The laws being passed recognize gold and silver as legal tender, and therefore it is free from taxation. So when someone buys precious metals and over time the metals appreciate in value against the dollar, it is not viewed as a capital gain, and it is not taxed, because you're simply converting one form of money into another. So states have always had a constitutional right to use gold and silver as legal tender. U.S. Constitutional Article 1, Section 10 says no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin and tender in payment of debts. So every state has been violating this because they've made Federal Reserve notes a tender and payment of debts. So basically we need to enact the Constitutional Tender Act and return to constitutional tender provisions. But if any state authorizes gold and silver as an alternative to Federal Reserve notes, the economy of such a state would stabilize and increase. It would weaken the Federal Reserve notes, and it would strengthen the appeal of gold and silver. Now, Arizona, there's a bill that the governor just signed in May. It'll make gold and silver legal tender starting August 9th. Texas is restoring sound money in an effort to return monetary sovereignty to the state. So Texas is creating a bullion depository. House Bill 3169 makes a multifaceted assault on the Fed's money monopoly. The provisions include they want to manage where and how state money is deposited, set the rates of exchange between precious metals and other currencies, including the U.S. dollar, that are stored in the depository. And Texas Senate Bill 2097 makes gold and silver legal tender. Now, an economics professor named William Green asserts that legislation to establish gold and silver as legal tender and to create a state bullion depository could undermine the Fed because people would favor gold and silver coins over Federal Reserve notes. Over time, the state will attract more banking business, its treasury will build real wealth, and people will abhor Federal Reserve notes. William Green also says over time, as residents of the state use both Federal Reserve notes and silver and gold coins, the fact that the coins hold their value more than Federal Reserve notes will lead to a reverse Gresham's law effect, where good money, gold and silver coins, will drive out bad money, Federal Reserve notes. As this happens, a cascade of events can begin to occur, including the flow of real wealth toward the state's treasury, an influx of banking business from outside of the state as citizens residing in other states carry out their desire to bank with some money, and an eventual outcry against the use of Federal Reserve notes for any transaction. At that point, the Federal Reserve System will have become unwanted and irrelevant and can be easily abolished by the people's elected representatives in Washington, D.C. Utah is trying to do a similar thing as Texas. Their House Bill 224 would authorize the investment of public funds in specie legal tender, gold or silver coin and bullion held in a state commercial specie repository. And its passage would give the state the option to hold funds in gold and silver instead of Federal Reserve notes. Now, I don't want to talk too much about this, but there's a state bank of North Dakota And it deprives the Federal Reserve member banks of public funds because all of the public funds stay in the state. So those are some options of state and federal government that they can take to as an alternative to the Fed.
Very interesting. And I think it's time that that states begin to do more of this. Because the Fed is way too powerful. Way too powerful.
Let me go back, Tina, to something that you had mentioned that Thomas Jefferson said that the issuing power of money should be taken from the banks and restored to Congress and the people to whom it belongs. Isn't that a simple way of saying that we should go back to what the Constitution states, that Congress shall coin and regulate money?
Yes. Yeah.
So Thomas Jefferson he's not bringing anything new to the table there. He's just reiterating what the Constitution already says. And I give him credit for that. Right?
Oh, yeah. No, he was definitely very educated in economics. He was against the central bank. He was like more free market, more what our country is based on, right? On a commands economy.
But then he also said that bank paper must be suppressed.
Yes.
And that it is really the only fund on which they can rely for loans. So, and this goes back to a conversation. And this is one of those rabbit holes that I guess I can't avoid going down. When it comes to, you have on the one hand hard currency like precious metals. And then you have paper currency that's backed by nothing. Now we have, and I was involved in a discussion with a family member within the last year, and I don't even know how we got around to talking about this. He's in the banking field. A number of my family members are in the banking field, but he brought up an interesting topic. He was talking about the fact that when it comes to loans and it comes to how money is exchanged, it's just really, when it boils down to it, it's just a bunch of digits being exchanged, that there's not even paper money being exchanged. So, I mean, is it really even bank paper anymore that when you go for a loan, let's say you go to a bank for a $15,000 loan, you don't get the $15,000 in Federal Reserve notes. You have a mechanical ledger that says that you have $15,000 in your account. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think Thomas Jefferson, he was like, it was more like the source of where the money was coming from. Like, he didn't trust the banks. Like, he thought they were dangerous to liberty. Because they could control, like, if you owe somebody money, they can control your actions, and he was afraid, like, that they wouldn't give credit to the United States during times of war, or that they would force, like, the terms of a surrender, or he just thought, he didn't want something outside of the government to have that power over the government.
Yep, he was right.
So, yeah.
Oh, definitely, and I would agree with him on that. It's interesting, Tina, that you bring up this, and it's, when you ever have a spokesperson from a private entity make a statement, you always have to wonder what their agenda is, and you have to question and scrutinize what they're saying. And this James Buell that you bring up of the American Bankers Association, who was opposed to even the greenback issue of paper money. Now, why do you think that he would have been opposed to the greenback issue of paper money?
Well, because the greenback was government treasury issued, and there was no interest charged on it. So the banks don't want that. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is before the Federal Reserve. This was 1877 exactly. that he said it. But the banks want to control the money supply. They don't want the government to do it. Because then they don't get interest and fees.
Right. Mm-hmm. Let me see if there's another question I had. Yeah, the John F. Kennedy assassination. Boy, that's really something. You want to talk about? You want to talk about the reasons for that? Was there one reason? Were there multiple reasons? I believe that there were multiple reasons. Yeah, that's certainly something that we really don't have the time to get into right now, why he was assassinated. But I guess my question overall, Tina, with regards to John F. Kennedy, do you think any of his actions were, in relation to the Federal Reserve System, were altruistic, and that they at least may have played a part in his assassination?
You know, I'm just going to defer to G. Edward Griffin on that. He doesn't think that Kennedy was trying to take power away from the Federal Reserve at all, that he was actually trying to shut down the silver certificates and replace them with Federal Reserve notes. So,
okay.
I mean, it was a tempting theory to kind of latch onto, but
yeah.
it doesn't seem to fit, unfortunately. It sure would be a good idea, though. Like, I mean, that would, if you want to replace Federal Reserve notes, you could certainly do a silver-backed currency. If you could do a gold-backed currency, you could do a nothing-backed currency like the greenback. Mm-hmm. But something as an alternative that's issued by the Treasury.
Right.
Well, when it comes to the Kennedy family, I guess and you go back to Joseph Kennedy, the patriarch of the family, I think that you had mentioned it earlier in the program, as a result of the crash of the Great Depression from 29 to 39, Joe Kennedy's worth went from $4 million to over $100 million.
Right.
So then my question would be, why would his son do anything to go against the family when his family's wealth was a direct result of the malevolent financial system that we have in this country? So I guess what I'm saying is I kind of agree with what you're saying, Tina, that it really his assassination didn't have anything to do with the Federal Reserve System. I think that there isn't any evidence out there that would suggest to me that there was any tension within the family itself. There was any departure of John F. Kennedy from perhaps the principles that his father held, corrupt as they may have been and probably were. But to me, that there's no evidence that there was a division or a rift or any suggestion thereof that may have brought us to the conclusion that John F. Kennedy was departing from, let's say, the Kennedy name itself. which would have led to him saying, you know what, the Federal Reserve System is corrupt, I'm going to do this, and therefore he was killed.
Right.
Okay. When it comes to, and we've still got about a half hour left, Bill?
20 minutes.
20 minutes. What do you think about this, Tina? Oh, and before we move on, there's the before we move on thing again. I say that without it. I swear I say that. I don't even know that I'm saying it. Alan Greenspan, when you said that he advocated the return to the gold standard. Okay, so clearly this is against the Federal Reserve System, correct or not?
Yes.
So Alan Greenspan, who was, and this was prior to him being named, appointed the chairman of the Federal Reserve System.
Right.
What year was he appointed? And who appointed Alan Greenspan? Do you know off the top of your head?
Not offhand. I have to look it up real quick.
Because this goes back to, Bill, the blueprint that's out there that these people of power go out there and advocate against the Federal Reserve System, okay? Mm-hmm. And then that all of a sudden they are inextricably linked with the Federal Reserve System. Yeah, right. So much so that they become the chairman of the Federal Reserve System. So Alan Greenspan was in the same way that Nelson Aldrich and Frank Vanderlick went out and said, hey, it's a bad idea. Forget about the Federal Reserve. It's a bad idea. Okay, they were right in the middle of it. They were part and parcel to the whole scam. Mm-hmm. So it looks like that Alan Greenspan was another one of those individuals who, to me, I think he knew he was going to be appointed, and he was rewarded in some way. But did you get that information, Tina?
Yeah, Ronald Reagan nominated Greenspan as the chairman of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve in 1987. So it's been a while.
Much later than I thought.
Yeah, it's 20 years after that statement.
Yeah, because he wrote that article in 1966. So it's called Gold and Economic Freedom, and it's online. It's pretty good.
About that.
So then how did Greenspan get from that to agreeing with fiat money? That's very fascinating to me.
I don't know.
And I don't think that any of us know unless one of his family members wants to come out with an expose. I think Alan Greenspan is still alive, is he not?
I think so.
Yeah, I think he is.
Yeah, I think so too. Bill, if you have something else, if not, I have. I think I have one more question.
Go ahead.
Before we end this series on the Federal Reserve and counterfeiters in high places, is this a simple solution? Am I thinking too simplistically? And Bill, chime in if you have an opinion on this as well. When I talk about the national debt as being at $20 trillion, do you think it's possible to begin printing constitutional money and pay off the national debt and begin to print debt-free money after that? Or am I thinking too simplistically?
Well, yeah, that was one of the suggestions that that they could pay off the U.S. bonds, which would be the debt rate, with debt-free Treasury notes. Mm.
What's the biggest roadblock to that?
Legislation. You just have to get rid of the Federal Reserve Act and National Banking Act and return to the Constitution. Which seems like a no-brainer.
Imagine that.
Anyone other than Ron, not Rand, Ron Paul, suggest that?
Well, he wanted to audit the Fed.
Who, Rand Paul?
Ron Paul. Well, maybe he did want to abolish the Fed, and I think he backed down on that and just wanted to audit. I think Alan Grayson, he was a Fed critic. I think he was from Florida.
Say that again. What's his name? Who?
Alan Grayson.
Alan Grayson. Okay, that name rings a bell.
Yeah.
Well, I guess my question is, and my concern is that it requires extraordinary courage to stand up to an institution that's been in place for 104 years. And do we really believe that any of our elected officials have that requisite courage?
Probably
I
not.
don't. No, I don't. So then where does that leave us?
Good question.
I mean, what can people do?
Oh, what can individuals do?
Yeah. What can we do as individuals?
Oh, sure. Okay. So we can encourage our legislators to enact the Constitutional Act, which is just going back to the states using gold and silver in payment of debts. That seems like a no-brainer, right?
Right.
You could also encourage the repeal of the Federal Reserve Act and National Banking Act. Now, in addition, we could use Treasury minted dollar coins as much as possible, because the Treasury mints these coins and does not charge interest to the taxpayer. As we discussed, the Federal Reserve charges interest for its service of printing money, which it doesn't actually print, but anyway. So if you use these coins, you can deprive the Federal Reserve of interest payments and cut into their profit margin. And in addition, coins are preferable to paper currency because they have some intrinsic value based on their metal content. So if the currency is ever devalued, a $1,000 bill could be knocked down to $10, even $1 overnight. But the coins tend to retain their value. And we had talked before about how the pre-1983 pennies are currently worth almost 2 cents based on their copper content. And the nickels are currently worth 3.5 cents, and based on their nickel content. But there's an act that they are proposing called Sense and Sensibility, and it wants to debase all the U.S. coins and make them entirely of steel. So then each person could also buy gold or silver, because they act as a store of value, and they're a method to protect yourself from inflation because they maintain their purchasing power. And we had talked before about how the price of tuition at Yale stayed about the same when it was priced in gold. So it was about 1,600 grams of gold, even though tuition at Yale in 1932 was over $1,000. And in 2015, it was over $62,000. But the gold price was about the same. And then also copper, when it's priced in gold, was about the same. And crude oil priced in gold has been about the same. For copper from 1936 was the same, and crude oil from the 1950s was the same. Now, Max Kaiser has a Crash JP Morgan Buy Silver campaign. And the idea is that, since JP Morgan and HSBC have large naked short positions in silver, and they use that to drive the price down. So if everybody would buy at least 1 ounce of physical silver and take it out of the supply, those two banks would be forced to cover their positions. and it might be enough to drive the banks into the ground. I don't know. That's the theory. Each person could also move money out of the corporate banks and into credit unions or out of the banking system altogether. And because banks engage in fractional reserve lending based on the amount of currency in their accounts, if you take the money out, they have less money to work with, and they can charge fewer fees and get less interest. And also because of that bail-in rule, where they can actually take your money out of your account, that's another reason, right? And then you could also use credit cards as little as possible. Banks get 3% in fees each time a purchase is made. The merchants have to pay the banks. So if you're the cardholder and you don't stay current on your payment, you also have to pay extra fees and interest. And so if you stop doing that, you would not give the bank so much income. Each time a credit card is used, it also inflates the currency supply, and it allows every purchase to be tracked, which some view as an invasion of privacy.
Tina, you, in answer to what I asked, what can we really do? You said to encourage legislators to enact a constitutional tender act. Is this something that's out there that was an actual proposal of some legislator?
Yes. Yeah, you can Google it. I don't know who proposed it. I'm sorry, but it is out there, and you can send it to your legislators. It's already like a bill. It's like a bill that's out there, and yeah.
Okay. When you said buy gold and silver, who do you buy gold and silver from?
You can buy from a dealer, like a coin dealer, maybe a jeweler.
Okay.
The idea is to get the physical, though, and not to have it in a bank somewhere, because they do fractional reserve lending on gold, too. Like, they say they have your gold, but they probably don't. Like, that's happened to people, and they're trying to get it to the bank. Oh gosh, I can't remember now. I think it was in Switzerland, but people were trying to get their gold out, and they couldn't get it. They were like, "Oh, we'll give you the money instead." It's like, no, I wanted my gold. But yeah, you want to take it out of the supply, and also it's safer if you have it, because you don't want it to be confiscated, or you don't want it to be well, it could be confiscated, yeah. You don't want it to be overseas somewhere, because then you can't get it if you need it. And you certainly don't want to have the ETF for it unless you're just trading, but that's not the same thing as having physical. So, the idea is that you have it in case of emergency. Take it out of the supply, and if you're trying to do Max Kaiser's campaign, then you have to take it out of the supply. But, yeah.
Right. Now, how hard do you believe it is going to be to get Americans to use their credit cards as little as possible? And is there a discernible difference between using your credit card as debit or credit?
Oh, well, debit would be better, because then it would just be... Well, okay, I don't want to say that, because debit cards have more risk under the UCC, the Uniform Commercial Code. So I don't want to tell people to use debit cards. I can't. But I don't think they have the same inflationary effect that a credit card does. But they're less protected. Like, if somebody steals your debit card or uses your debit card, you don't have the same protection as a credit card. Like,
and the reason that I asked that is I've really, and I guess this goes towards my desire to be a private person and have no one else's business to know where I've spent my money, and I think that this is the whole ruse of the cards that are issued by grocery store chains and pharmaceutical chains, where you become a member of these various commercial outfits, and a bag of potato chips, if you have a card to that store, is going to cost you $2.50, but if you have their card, it's going to cost you $2. So, of course, and the membership is free. You just sign up, and you're given a card, and, to me, this is just, clearly it is a way for the IRS to track your spending if they ever want to audit you. So, to me, that is a huge ruse. So, but there's no way around it. I don't want to spend more for goods and services than I have to. So, but recently, what I've really done is tried really to use cash, to have some cash on hand to spend without having anyone have a record, a paper trail, a mechanical trail of where I'm spending my money. So I just think that that's just me personally. I don't know where you guys think that we are as a nation as far as plastic is concerned. I observe when I go to the store, I rarely see anyone using cash to purchase anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I rarely do as well.
Well, that's why I was suggesting people use those dollar coins from the Treasury. I know they're kind of a hassle, but like for small stuff, why not?
Okay, so where do you get those dollar coins?
Just go to the bank. They come in a $25 roll.
A $25 roll?
Yeah, but you can also get probably loose. Like they might have some on hand, but yeah, $25 for a roll of dollar coins.
Well, and I guess that would be, and Tina, that goes to another aspect of it. I think people don't want to be awkward.
Yeah, I went to the bank and I wanted to get a roll of these coins, and the banker's like, "Oh, what do you want to use them for?" It's like, what do you think I want to use them for?
Yeah, right. Well, first of all, what is your business what I want to use them for? It's none of your business, period.
Right.
But I'm thinking more on the end of actually going to spend that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand. You don't want...
If you've got... Okay, say you go to the restaurant, you put cash down, and you've got a tip. It's like $5. Well, put 5 of those coins down. Like, who cares?
Yeah.
Or if you've got to go mail a letter or go to the post office, and it's like $3, well, give them 3 of those coins. You don't have to give a roll. Here's 25, roll or whatever. But
well, see, Bill,
as much as possible.
This is the information that Tina's brought to the program the last 3 times. The last 3 times that she's been on, and I think that it'll be very awkward for people to start doing that, and I think it has to do with conditioning. Mm-hmm. Certainly, people are conditioned to use plastic. And they're using cash money less and less, and then when you start introducing treasury coins into that, and then it even gets more awkward. So it's not. Obviously, I support that, but I think that it's. We're really racing to catch up to that point. To get to that point is going to be. If it got to the point where people are carrying around these treasury issued coins, then we're in a far more advanced place than I thought we would ever be. But so I think we're about to wrap up, Bill. I think that we got through pretty much everything. Just
Yeah.
Phew.
We had to. say what, Tina?
Phew. That was a lot of information.
WPHEW. Correct. Yeah.
Right.
Just let me do this real quick. And how much time do we have, Bill?
We're at about 14 minutes.
All right, let me do this real quick. This is my exclamation point. My exclamation point. And I'll ask both you and Tina to give an ending statement as well. I think this is something that warrants something almost like in a court case where where closing arguments are presented by the prosecution and the defense. This would be my closing argument, and half of it I owe to G. Edward Griffin. Tina has mentioned a number of times, and I myself as well. He's the author of The Creature from Jekyll Island. Tina as well as Edward Griffin have brought some clarity to the subject to me, where, as I said earlier, it's something that I choose not really to think about, only if I have to. And we're going to have Tina if we had G. Edward Griffin on, I would have to do the same thing to prepare, to get some familiarity with all this. Right now I have a headache. No joke, I have a headache. All right. Here's my closing statement. When we talk about bailouts, and I voiced my utter disdain for the taxpayers being responsible for private enterprise being bailed out because of their failed business practices. It's their responsibility. If they fail, then they fail. If people suffer, if people lose their jobs, then they lose their jobs. But I don't want the mindset to be, if I'm a private, and I go back to the stadium building as well. If I'm a sports owner, if I go to a town and I say, you know what, and Las Vegas just encountered this, Bill, with their stinking hockey team. If you build me a rink, I'll bring my hockey team to yours. So then, Las Vegas floats bonds, right? Las Vegas. If they don't outright take the money from people, they float bonds, and who's responsible for paying the interest on the bonds? The taxpayers. It goes to the mindset, and then with private industry, if you have it in the back of your mind, it has to do with risk. We can take risks, because if the risks that we take don't pan out for us personally as a corporation, the taxpayers are there. I'm against the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. I'm against that as well. Mm-hmm. Here are some of the bailouts. The Penn Central Railroad was bailed out in 1970, and this is G. Edward Griffin's research. Lockheed was bailed out in 1970. The Commonwealth Bank of Detroit was bailed out in 1972. New York City, I repeat, New York City was bailed out in 1975. Chrysler, this may have been what you were referring to, Bill, was bailed out in 1978.
Oh, wow.
The first Pennsylvania Bank First Pennsylvania Bank was bailed out in 1980. And the largest of the banks that were bailed out up until 1982 was Continental Illinois Bank of Illinois. And when it comes to interest, again, my thanks to G. Edward Griffin and his research. Mm-hmm. He talks about a house and this is very clear, made very clear to someone with a simplistic mind such as my own. If a $100,000 home is set out to be built, you have $30,000 that is spent for land and architectural fees and permits. That leaves $70,000 for the actual construction of the house. What does that include? That will be the materials, that are needed to build the house and the laborers that will charge to use those materials to build that house. So the buyer goes to the bank. The buyer puts 20% down. He takes out a 10% loan for 30 years. Now, this is going back to, we're talking about the 80s. We're talking about 10%. Now, what is it, 2%, 1%, 3%? I don't even know. That buyer will pay an interest at the completion of that loan, $172,741, compared to the $70,000 for labor and materials. That's 2.5 times more that will be paid to the banks than to those who will actually build the house. The banks who did nothing other than to provide the fictitious money available and provide all the materials. $172,741 interest on nothing is excessive.
Yep.
That's what excessive interest is. Think about that when you buy a home. And I've brought this up before many years ago with accountants, and it falls on deaf ears.
Yep.
So this is the fraud of the banking system that we have.
Yeah. Well, my closing statement, and again, we want to thank you so much, Tina. I'm going to make this real short so I can give you the last word on this series. I think it's incumbent upon us as Americans to, do everything that we can, and that includes getting in touch with our congressmen, our senators, and push for them to abolish this monster. And one such person, I don't know if you're familiar with him or not, Tina, but his name was Jack Metcalf. He was a Washington State Senator for 20 years, and he was a U.S. Congressman from 95 to 2000, Republican Senator in Washington. He waged a war to abolish the Federal Reserve and to restore to Congress the power to issue money, a power that is clearly stated in our Constitution, as you've pointed out throughout this series, Tina. And he had a little story that he told to illustrate what the Fed does, and he wrote a book called The 200-Year Debate, which I ordered. I'm waiting for it to come in. But anyway, he said that 4 cowboys put up their belongings as collateral to borrow a deck of cards. But the hitch is that each of the 4 cowboys must bring back 14 cards at the end of the evening, which, of course, is a mathematical impossibility because there are only 52 cards in a deck. So that's only 13 to each cowboy. In the end, one of the players ends up with only 10 cards, and he loses all of his belongings. And that is the problem with the Fed. It creates money to make loans, but doesn't create money to pay the interest. And that, in a nutshell, is the monster that was created at Jekyll Island. Tina, it's 7 minutes. You're on.
All right. Well, all I want to say is that if we just went back to the Constitution and said what the framers wanted, all of this stuff would be a moot point. We wouldn't have to worry about the Federal Reserve, the federal income tax, none of that.
Yeah.
So it's like, it seems like a simple solution. It seems like a no-brainer to just go back to the Constitution, but I don't know. We've got such powerful interests behind it, and they bankroll the Congress people, so I don't know. I mean, it's just ironic because the founders, the framers of the Constitution, the founding fathers, they were trying to get away from those the central bank problem of England, right? Where the king was taking away their currency and like the colonial script, I guess, and so they had these central bank policies that they were trying to escape, and then we get back under it. The same, basically. I mean, it's the same basic.
Yeah.
People or that class of people anyway that were just enslaved again by them. Same thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. I mean, I think it'll have to be the individuals in the states. I think you probably have more luck. I'm not saying don't try to go to your federal government legislators, but the states, I mean, especially like if you're in Texas or, Utah or something, you can, make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
With the gold and silver depository and all that stuff. So they might be the place to make more effective change.
Yeah. All right, so let's all get in a big van and head to Texas.
Or I mean, you can just go contact your state people and try to get suggest that they do a similar thing like Texas.
There you
go. I'm sure those bills are online. You could just give them a copy as a template. I don't know.
Well, we live in the Keystone State here, Tina, and they have so much red tape to cut through for anything. I can never see that happening here. But it is a great idea, and hopefully more states will join in.
Yeah.
Well, we just have a few minutes left. Tina, you want to give out your information on how people can get your book and where they can contact you and read your blog?
Sure. So my name is Tina Foster. I'm an attorney in Seattle, and my blog is the Plastic Maca Paul is Dead blog. And it's plasticmaca.blogspot.com. My book is The Splitting Image, Exposing the Secret World of Doubles, Decoys, and Imposter Replacements. And I'm on Facebook, Tina Foster. You will recognize me because I'm half Paul McCartney and half whoever the other guy is. So people can email me from my blog or just message me on Facebook, whatever. It's fine.
Great. Well, again, Tina, thanks so much. It's really been a pleasure for Joe and myself to be with you these last 3 weeks, and then prior to that, in regard to PID and the whole Luciferianism / chemtrail / NWO, and we've really valued everything that you've brought to our programs, and we hope to have you back. Maybe vaccines next or something like that. But
sure, that'd be fun.
We look forward to keeping in touch and to having you back again. So again, thanks so much.
All right. Well, you guys have a good night. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Great.
Thanks.
Okay, bye.
Tina. Good night. All right, Joe. We have 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Wow, that was a fast hour. That was 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
Damn. Out of here.
Yep, out of here.
Well, yeah. I mean, I didn't get a chance to thank Tina, but she brought a lot of information.
She really did.
Over the last, I don't know when the first time we had Tina on. Was it 2-3 months ago?
Yeah.
So she's been on. We haven't had anyone since we began interviewing Tina. So, I mean, she's been with us for the last 2-3 months. So, I mean, I want to thank her for that, because it requires a lot of research and a lot of preparation and a lot of time. And for people who don't do this, they don't. I guess you can't. It's not a knock, but it's the reality is that it requires a lot of time and time away from things that you either want to be doing or need to be doing. So I really appreciate Tina's efforts over these last 2 or 3 months. And as you said, Bill, we'll definitely have Tina back on, regardless of whether it's vaccines or other areas. You know, we just appreciate people that in the past that we've had on that have really contributed significantly to what we do as a ministry. So we'll look forward and you know, stay in touch, and you'll for those of you who really like Tina, she'll keep checking our website, www.answersfortheparanormal.org, or Tina's website, plasticmaca.org, and you'll find out when she'll be on with us next.
Yeah, for sure. So again, thanks for tuning in tonight. For Joe, this is Bill, and I want to thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time on Answers for the Paranormal. Good night, Joe.
Good night, brother.